Good evening all and welcome. I'd like to wish a very happy birthday to Jameson. He has used his Patreon perk to select tonight's video topic of Middle of Nowhere, and if you would like to do the same, feel free to follow the link to Patreon. I hope you've had a wonderful day. I'd also like to reacquaint you with my friend Deadly Cure, who has narrated a handful of tonight's stories. If you enjoy his work, feel free to follow the link in the description or at the end of the video to listen to even more from him. I've actually narrated a handful of stories over there if you are so inclined. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I grew up in a semi-rural neighborhood on the edge of Juneau, Alaska, just far enough out that nature still had the upper hand. Our house sat at the end of a quiet and quaint cul-de-sac. About 150 yards beyond our fence, there was a long, narrow dust road that had been cut through a dense wall of Sitka spruce and hemlock. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades, choked by moss, half swallowed by roots, and vanishing into the forest. It looked ominous. Behind our neighborhood were more than 500 acres of completely untouched wilderness. So when I was 16, me and my friends Eli, Danny, and Nate decided to explore that dirt road. It was late July, the sun barely starting to dip below the trees at around 10 p.m. We packed a few flashlights thinking we might be out past dark, and slipped through a gap in the fence that led straight to the start of the road. We walked for about a mile, maybe two. The deeper we went, the quieter the world became. Even the birds seemed to avoid this place. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves under our feet, and the occasional groan of a tree limb swaying above us. Just when we were about to turn back, we saw it, half hidden behind a curtain of overgrown alder trees. An old, battered barn stood crooked on its foundation, flanked by 2 or 3 crumbling outbuildings that were barely standing. The metal roof of the barn was rusted orange, sagging in the middle like it could fall apart any second. We stopped dead in our tracks staring at it. "I think this used to be a barn," Eli muttered. As we approached the smallest building, maybe a storage shed at one point, the door had long since rotted off its hinges. We went in. Inside, the air was damp and musty. That's when it hit us. This wasn't a shed. This was someone's bedroom. An old metal-framed bed sat against the far wall, the mattress soaked and shredded, reeking of mildew. A long dark stain trailed up the wall behind the headboard. No one said anything, but we were all thinking the same thing. Near the foot of the bed, we found a warped wooden box full of personal belongings. Inside was an old yearbook, the pages yellowed and warped by water, and scrawled in fading pen on the back cover was "Congrats, Class of '62. Underneath it were several pair of jeans, long johns, and a few flannel shirts, all musty but still folded. There were also dusty vinyl records, a few fly fishing guides, and tucked between the pages of one book a neatly folded letter, which I wish I hadn't have opened. It was a suicide note, handwritten. The man talked about losing his wife and how the forest had become the only place he could feel her, about how no one had come looking for him and how he was grateful for it. We didn't finish reading it. We all stopped, slowly looked at one another, and without saying another word, we turned and walked out. As we made our way back out, something caught Nate's eye. "There's something in the barn loft," he said, pointing at a gaping hole near the roofline. From that angle, it looked like bowling pins. Curiosity got the better of us. The inside of the barn was even worse. Rotting hay, rusted tools, and what looked like animal bones scattered in the corner, and a sketchy wooden ladder led up to the loft. Against our better judgment, I volunteered to climb up. The loft creaked under my weight. The air was heavy and stale. And that's when I saw them. 3 dolls sat in a row on an old shelf, white lace, dressed, red satin ribbons tied around their necks, perfectly clean, No dust, no cobwebs, like they had only just been placed there. I didn't say anything. I climbed down the ladder fast and without waiting. We all started walking, then jogging, then full-on running back down the road. None of us said a word until we were back at the fence behind my house. It's been 10 years and I've never returned. I live in Anchorage now, but whenever I visit my parents, I take their dog, Scout, for a walk near that area. He loves it, always tugging towards the road like there's something exciting down there. But I keep my distance and always carry a sidearm. I still think about that place, still wonder who the man was, and why those dolls were so clean. But a bigger part of me is afraid whatever left those dolls there might still be watching.
A few years back, I lived in Berkshire County, Massachusetts, named for the Berkshire Mountain Range. The Berkshires are actually a sub-range of the northern Appalachian Mountains, and I assume if you spend any time in online paranormal spaces like the Reddit forum, you know that weird stuff happens in the Appalachians. I guess I figured since I was so far north, I was safe from the usual haunts, safe to whistle at night or walk the woods alone, or to not close my curtains after dark. But I was wrong. It was either late summer or early fall of 2020, and my fiancé and I were leaving the tiny suburb where we lived to go to a nearby bigger city for cheaper groceries. In order to get there, we had to drive about 20 to 30 minutes, the first leg of which was through a heavily wooded, hilly area. It must have been around 6 or 7 in the evening, still bright out and well lit, though visibility was poor because everything is lush, green bushes and trees. We were driving up a hill road with a few houses, both sides of the street full to bursting with plant life. The green was super dense and impossible to see into. It was warm, so we were driving with the windows down. As we got to the top of the hill, we heard a strange noise. My partner and I both grew up surrounded by woods and wildlife, so we know deer when we hear them. Some people who are unfamiliar with deer might think they're serene and totally silent. But when deer want to be loud, they can make some haunting sounds, especially if it's a male calling long distance. It's like a long, booming honk, like a war horn. Think in the family of a bagpipe, with an edge that clearly marks it's an animal instead of mechanical. Anyway, we recognized it as a deer, but it sounded wounded. The honk was distressed and wobbled at the end like the deer was losing strength. Unfortunately, people speed in the area, and it wasn't unbelievable that some jackass had hit a deer and drove off without calling animal control or helping in any way. We couldn't see skid marks, blood, or a body on the road, so I asked my fiancé to pull over in someone's driveway so I could check the dense foliage on the side of the road. Deers like to hide themselves and hide their babies, and I, a bleeding heart animal lover and also an idiot, was on the verge of panicking about how we were going to help this injured baby deer. I was already making plans to visit the veterinary hospital in the area that kept late night hours, so I began pushing aside bushes and looking around. I've never interacted up close with a deer, so I was making soft little "come here kitty" sounds, cat being my only reference at the time. I searched the bushes on the side of the street with the houses, which was slightly less dense because of the driveways, but I found nothing. I checked both ways and crossed the heavier wooded side and began looking there. I don't have the best eyesight to begin with, so sorting through the green was difficult and it took some time. My fiancé was busy speaking with the homeowner of the driveway we were parked in. He had come out to see if we had had an accident or a flat tire, and if we were okay. Luckily, I heard a rustle. My heart dropped as I realized it was right against the edge of the road, in the very first row of bushes. Not an ideal hiding spot for a deer, which meant the poor creature might be in a worse condition than I thought if it couldn't drag itself deeper into the foliage. I moved downhill towards the sound, placing myself at the crux of the road's turn, which was a blind corner. The rest happened so fast for me, but also felt like slow motion. I bent down to move some branches aside where I thought the rustling had come from, hoping the animal wouldn't run or jump at my face. I was so entranced with finding it, with helping it. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I had left the hurt animal behind. I finally cleared the bottom of the bush, seeing the ground with its leaf litter. Baby deer camouflaged nicely into fallen leaves and dirt, so I stared into this space hard, but there was nothing there. No shape, no eye, no movement, no dirt. Still, I felt compelled to stay there, in that position back in the road. It felt like if I just looked long enough, perhaps the deer might appear in front of me. What actually appeared directly behind me was a speeding minivan taking the turn too freaking fast. There are no sidewalks on this street and no guardrails. There was just the blind turn and a bad driver who couldn't calculate right, and me at the edge of the road not looking. I heard the van, and that alone forced me to rip my eyes away from the bushes. I threw myself out the way of the van and into the leaves, tripping backwards until my back hit a tree that steadied me. I had been only a moment and a few inches away from being absolutely creamed. The van didn't even stop. Didn't even acknowledge that they'd almost flattened a person. My fiancé called for me. The search for the deer, which we hadn't heard call again since we pulled over, was too dangerous to continue. I looked both ways about 1,000 times, panicking and jittering my way over to the safer side of the street and the driveway we were in. We got back in the car, listened a moment more, and then left for our grocery run. My fiancé could tell me something had happened, and I believe they had suspicions that something other than the car spooked me. I didn't want to talk about it. We were still driving through the woods after all, and we'd have to drive back this way. I kept it to myself. The pull I had felt, the hypnotic way I could have spent hours looking in that hollow in the bushes. The way I felt so sure I would find the injured baby I was looking for if I'd just stay in that spot right there. The way I was sure now, as we pulled away, that there wasn't and never had been an injured deer. Something called me to that spot, and I ignored all the Appalachian advice I had ever heard. I answered, and almost ended up smeared on the pavement for it. I don't know why whatever was there wanted to cause someone death. I don't know a lot of things about the motivation of the old things that live in the Berkshires. What they are, why they do what they do, if they hate us or if they're just hungry. But I know they exist. They're dangerous, every bit as dangerous as their southern cousins. The northern Appalachians may not be a popular topic, but they're no less wild, old, or vicious than the southern counterpart. I guess I'm posting this because I want people to know that. To remember that these mountains are older than bone, older than the rings of Saturn, and stuff just as old exists here. If we lose sight of that, if we think some miles of distance in a different state boundary protects us, we are walking into a trap with eyes wide open. Be careful in the Berkshires. Be careful in the Appalachians, wherever you are on them. And if you hear something call you, no, you didn't. Many moons ago, back when I was a greenhorn, one of the first jobs I did in the oil field was a frack job at the land site in Southeast Asia. We had our equipment trucked in from our home base from the country next door. A journey of 2 days whilst the crew flew in, and we were bussed 5 hours to the job site. The oil field was in the middle of this agricultural district, fields of sugarcane and other crops dotted randomly
with well pads and big refineries somewhere in all the middle of it. Our well pad was in the middle of a sugarcane field. All you could see around you was a wall of tall sugarcane taller than a man. The days were searing hot, and the nights very chilly. To top it off, the insects were unforgiving. Every few seconds or a minute, you'd get stabbed with a damned hypodermic needle. Bloody mosquitoes could bite through our coveralls and the layer of clothes we had underneath. At night, you could see them swarming around the floodlights and on the porta potty wall. I counted no less than 4 different colors of mosquito: black, stripy black, red, and green. Mosquito repellent didn't work. The mosquito coils the locals had didn't work. I tell you what worked: cigarette smoke. You blew a cloud of it at the bugs and they would disperse for a few seconds. Then the invisible doctor scooched over to your ass to give you another shot. Anyway, as the newbie, I was working 18 to 20-hour days, rigging up IM and running lab tests side by side. Didn't help that the senior engineer was a workaholic, but I got to see both day and night shift along with some shenanigans. First off, our equipment, our own babies, those guys probably loved them more than their own wives, arrived on location and nothing was working. Engines wouldn't start, electronics were messed up, had a week's worth of work to get things sorted out, in fits and starts. As soon as we got something fixed, something else would break. Our techie and mechanic were constantly reciting a holy litany of profanity as they worked. Complaints included how the polarity of our electronics was swapped over, reversed the force shield generator, phaser bank polarity, messed up gearboxes, radiator leaking. Mind you, these units were in perfect working condition when we put them on the truck. Seems like too much strangeness happening, simple trucking vibrations and all. The level of equipment malfunction was simply unheard of for the industry. Back in the lab, things were interesting. I had a fancy pants chandelier viscometer that didn't work. I mean, it did work back at home base, just didn't work now. Techie said the motor polarity was reversed. Some I/O ports were disconnected and stuff. Got it fixed that night. At the stroke of midnight, I was right there. The damned motor stopped spinning clockwise and began going anti. Cue a litany of fury and percussive maintenance from the tech priest. Fixed. Worked for a day, then started turning anti-clockwise again at midnight. This continued for a few days until we gave up and went back to the tired and true ancient lab rituals. Another night I was in the lab when I heard screaming outside. I stepped out the lab cabin and thought it was raining. The guy races past me at full speed, screaming, "Well, kick!" I glanced at the rig, saw liquid gushing up furiously, and just hauled ass. Turns out the well suddenly took a kick, causing a big gas bubble to come into the well bore and gush out a lot of brine. Crew had it under control in a short while. When we finally had everything in working order after various hijinks, countdown to the job, 4 hours. A bunch of the guys were on the hydraulic workover basket, turning the drill pipe to set packer down hole. Clock strikes 12, lo and behold, the hydraulic system fails on the power tongs holding the pipeline in place. All the torque stored up the drill pipe just lets loose in an instant. It spun wildly, and there was a huge valve sitting right atop, with the big, 3-foot diameter hand wheel that went lashing around. The 8 guys in the basket just dove for the floor and miraculously no one was hurt. That big hand wheel, however, slammed against something and went flying. Right at the moment, the company man had just stepped out of the coffee shack, steaming coffee in hand, and was looking up at the basket when that flywheel came flying off in his direction and slammed into the ground, coming to rest barely a few feet shy of where he stood. With so many weird incidents and a major near miss happening within such a short period of time, It sure put the fear of God or whatever local deity was in charge in the whole crew. The next morning, everyone on the well site, including the night crew, turned up. Rather than the usual safety stand-down meeting yada yada, we all gathered in the little shrine in the corner of the well pad. The local guys had gone to the farmer's market early in the morning, gathered up a bunch of fruit, flowers, and offerings, and we had group prayer at the shrine, seeking the blessing of the local deity. It was remarkable, because we had a rather diverse crew of various faiths, but that morning we were all united in our prayer. And you know what? It worked. We had a few good days after that where everything was smooth as silk, unusually so. Then the random equipment malfunction started again. This time the locals stepped in pretty quickly and started daily offerings and prayers. The things ran smoothly for the remainder of the month we were at that location. Superstitious much? I don't know. All I know is I learned to always respect the land you work on.
I'm posting this to pass on an interesting story and to, hopefully, find anyone else with a similar experience in this location. My wife and I were camping last year in Blue River Reservoir in Oregon. We camp here often and decided to explore up FSR 520 and found a cool abandoned bridge far back in the woods over Cook Creek. This spot was beautiful, and we were set up over the river on this long abandoned bridge over the creek. If you've ever been in the Oregon woods, you know that they can give off a creepy vibe, and this was no exception. But it really was a dream campsite, being 40 feet directly over a river, while on a bridge with limbs growing everywhere over it, isn't your everyday spot. I'll throw in for background that there was no one within the last 3 miles of us, and we had to hike in a little from our car, approximately 1/10 of a mile. We explored around the area for quite a while and didn't come across anything out of the ordinary, besides a pair of shoes and a name, Mona, written in ash on a rock of the fire ring. While we were sitting by the fire, I noticed a very bright flash of light over the river and snapped my head up but didn't see anything. A few moments later, I was paying closer attention and watched a ball of light float, even with the bridge 40 feet in the air, from one side to the other in the woods over 50 feet. The light was very blue. My thought the first time had been somehow headlights had come through, but I would have heard a car, and no man-made light could get to us in this isolated area. This blue light was unlike anything I had ever seen. I mentioned it to my wife, but didn't want to freak her out, so I dropped the subject soon after. Later that night in the tent, we had the mesh lining up so we could see outside. My wife gasped and watched as the blue light floated at the end of the bridge, 30 feet away, and hovered in the air. After a good bit of time, it shot into the woods. It being late at night, we were obviously scared of someone's headlamp, but it shot away 40 times as quick as any human could go, and we saw nothing attached. Our dog left the tent and stared at that spot for the next 10+ minutes, while also peeking down the side of the bridge very seriously. Has anyone had a similar experience on Forest Development Road 520 in Blue River Reservoir, Oregon, or had any similar experience in the PNW?
Back when I was 14, my family had moved from our home in England to the Republic of Ireland, where we lived for a further 6 years. We had first moved to the northwest of the country, but after a year of living there, we were then relocated to the Irish Midlands, as my dad had gotten a new job working in Dublin. My parents had bought a cottage on the outskirts of a very small village that was a stopping point from one of the larger towns to the next. This village was so small and remote, there was basically nothing to do. But not long after moving here, and taking to exploring the surrounding area with my border collie Trixie, I eventually found a large stretch of bogland containing a man-made forest. Every weekend or half-term away from school, I took to walking this area with my dog, in which I would follow along a railway line used for transporting peat. However, after months of trekking this very same bogland, I eventually stopped going there. I can't recall the exact reason why, maybe because I always felt as though I was trespassing, which I wasn't, or because the bogland was so bumpy and uneven. I always came home with horrific blisters. Although I stopped going to this bogland to walk my dog, outside of the nearby towns where I went to school there was a public forest. Because this forest was a 20-minute drive away, my dad would take me and Trixie there, drop us off, and collect us 2 to 3 hours later. What I loved about these woods was that it was always quiet, only with the occasional family, dog walker, or jogger passing us by. One particular evening, I had gone back to the woods with Trixie, where my dad would later collect us after running some errands. Making our way along the trail, the evening had already started to dimmer. Wanting to make our way back to the car park before it got too dark, I decided to take a shortcut through the forest, via one of the many narrow side trails. Following down one of these side trails, me and Trixie stumbled upon a small teepee-shaped hut made of logs. Loving a good game of hide-and-seek, I would sometimes hide inside this teepee when Trixie wasn't looking, where she would spend the next few minutes circling round the hut, trying to find me, not realizing she could just go inside. Whether I played this game with Trixie that day, I can't recall, but following down this exact same side trail, I turned to look behind me. Staring down the entryway, I then see a man walking 20 meters behind, having just taken this side trail. For some unknown reason, I had a strange, instant feeling about this man, even though I had only just noticed him. I can't remember or even describe the way this man was walking, but the way he did felt suspicious to me. Listening to my instinct, or perhaps my paranoia, I quickly latched my leads back onto Trixie and hurriedly made my way down the trail. A few minutes later, although I had reached back onto the main trail, the evening had already begun to get much darker. Again, turning to see if the man was still behind me, I could see him around the curve only 10 meters away from me now. I did try and tell myself I was just being paranoid and this man was likely not following me, but my gut instinct told me something was off. Thinking ahead, I pull out my phone to call my dad, as to make sure he was already in the car park waiting for me, but there was no answer. Because there was no answer, I assumed he was probably still driving, and because he was still driving, I just hoped my dad was nearly on his way. By the time I made it back to the car park, it was basically pitch black by now, and there's just one single car in the parking area, but it wasn't my dad's. Sitting down by a picnic bench to wait for him to come and get us, all I could do was hope he would be coming soon, and this strange man from the woods was not following me after all. Only a minute or two later, I could hear the footsteps of this very same man approaching through the darkness. Anxiously anticipating him pass by, I tried to distract myself on the phone, or at least make myself seem less approachable. Thankfully enough, the man just walks completely by me, entering the car park. The man then gets in his vehicle, the only car in the car park, but doesn't drive away. He stays there, sat inside his car, with his headlights on and the engine running. 20 minutes have gone by now, but my dad still wasn't there, and yet this very same stranger was trying to call and text my dad, saying I was waiting for him. I was met with no answer. While I continued waiting, I tried to rationalize why this man hadn't decided to drive off. Whatever reasons I came up with, they were not very convincing for me. And for those whole 20 or so minutes, I sat in those woods in complete darkness, hearing nothing but the hum of this stranger's engine among the silent night air. What made this situation even more anxiety-inducing was that my dog Trixie had been endlessly whining at my feet, scraping dirt away beneath the bench to make a surprisingly deep hole. Trixie was in general a very nervous dog and whined at everything, but perhaps she too felt as though something about this situation wasn't right. Thankfully, after what felt like a long time, the strange man with his engine and headlights on reversed from the car park and exited, leaving me and Trixie in peace. Although we were now alone, We were basically stranded outside of a dark forest. I couldn't help but feel a huge sigh of relief come over me. My dad did eventually come to get us 10 minutes after the man had finally decided to drive off. Do you know what my dad's excuse was as to why he was so late? He forgot to pick us up. I don't know if that man was really following me through the forest, and I definitely don't know why he sat in his car for 20 minutes. But if I had to learn something from that experience, it would be the following. My dad is sometimes a careless douche, and 2, never hike through the forest alone late in the evening.
When I was 12 years old, I went to an outdoor school camp for 3 days. Practically our whole grade was there. It was Camp Chief Hector. I still remember my counselor's name was Coda. I had a lot of fun there, but I got extremely scared when it came to nighttime. My room was located at the very end of the hall inside the cabin, right next to the emergency exit doors. It was me and my friend, along with 2 people we didn't like inside that room. On my first night, I had horrible vibes from the room, and it being so strange. 2 bunk beds and 1 window, a little square room, and it just had a horrible presence. I made it through one night, and the rest of the day was fine. My second night was worse, and I began thinking something was outside our window without any proof. After the second night, me and everyone in the room had bad vibes, and my friends in the next door room didn't. I had no idea why until the third night. On the third night, I was woken by a light in the hallway from the door of the outroom being open. The light was faint since it was way down the hall. I was on the bottom bed of the left bunk facing the door, and my friend was on the top bed of the opposite bunk. One of the people in our room left the door open when they went out. The other one was asleep. My friend was also awake, I just didn't know it. When I woke up, I automatically put on my glasses and was looking around until I see the coat rack in the corner move. The coat rack had our coats on it, and next to it was a chest of drawers. He wasn't naked, but I could only see the silhouette of his body. His hands were up, covering his face. He was crouched in a frog position, almost on top of the chest. I was stuck there, just staring at this kid I had never seen before. I said nothing. Here's the best part. He lowered his hands and revealed his face. He was staring at me, smiling a huge smile. His eyes were huge. He kept staring, but slowly he was moving off the chest closer. I was stuck, and my friend this whole time was seeing what was happening. He was also frozen. Then suddenly, my guy Jason, the guy from the washroom, came back running down the hall and slammed the door shut. My friend and I were suddenly out of our trance and got up instantly and flinged out our flashlights pointed to the corner. The kid was gone. I explained why I pointed my flashlight to the corner, and then he explained. We both saw the same thing, and to this day, we still talk about it sometimes. Thank God there wasn't a fourth night. We didn't explain the story to Jason because he was an ELL student, and the other guy was an annoying person we didn't like. I remember the whole thing so vividly. It's crazy how we both saw it too. When I got home, I told my family what happened, and I began my research to see if anything happened at that camp. I didn't find anything. So this is my story. 2017, Camp Chief Hector, Alberta. That's when it happened.
This is one of those memories from probably 23 to 24 years ago that I hate myself for not being able to remember all the details, but thought I'd share what I can remember, and it'll be short because of that. I'm almost positive I was driving on the road where my friend's family had land that we would go camping at when this happened, and that it was either him or another friend in our car. I thought it was this other friend of mine, and when I asked him about it, he didn't remember, so doesn't think it was him. I wish I could remember who it was with, so I could confirm and maybe get more details, but anyway.
It was late night on a very rural wooded road, not a gravel road, but a narrow, older asphalt one. We were doing about 40, and I noticed there was an object on the road up ahead. As I got closer, I could see it was glowing. I started to slow down, and once we were about 20 yards away, I stopped. We approached the object. It was a small rectangular lantern with a lit candle in the middle of the road. There were no cars around, and I'm not even sure there were any houses or cabins or anything in the immediate area. I'm pretty sure both of us got the same sinking feeling at the exact same time and simultaneously said, "Let's get the hell out of here." We jumped back in the car and floored it out of there. I looked in the mirror and my buddy was looking back and we didn't see anything. We were both like, "What the hell is that?" I mean, it was for sure in a very, very rural wooded area with very few houses. Like maybe 1 or 2 houses every few miles, and in that spot there was nothing but wood on either side. Was it just a prank? But who and why in such a secluded zone? Him and I both felt like it was a trap of some sort, for what, who knows, but we weren't hanging around to find out. I'm glad we left immediately instead of lingering any longer. Has anyone else come across anything like this before?
This happened to me a while back when I decided to go on a camping trip alone. I always liked camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail I was going to take, packed my camping gear and my rifle for protection, and jumped into my truck. I get to this trail early in the morning and hike about 15 to 20 miles in until I find the right spot and head off the trail to find a place to put my tent up. I stumble upon a nice-sized clearing and decide that it's a nice, beautiful spot to settle down. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent to the southernmost edge of the clearing, next to the tree line, and manage to get a fire going. I roast some weenies and start to hear a sound in the distance underneath all the forest noise. It sounds like an animal, most likely a deer with a lame leg, as it sounded like the animal was making a walking, dragging noise. I feel bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away, and it was getting dark, so I couldn't really go and put it out of its misery. I think nothing of it after that, and go about eating my food. After I eat, I douse the fire and crawl into my tent and insert myself into my sleeping bag. I decide that even at my exhausted and relaxed state, I can't go to sleep, so I pull out a book I brought with me and start to read by the light of my lamp. Hours go by, and I hear that sound again, this time closer, right at the opposite side of the clearing. Surprised, I put my book down and listen to this animal drag across the clearing towards my tent. It's really loud at this point, and it sounds like the hooves are being heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after, like the deer is dragging something along. It makes it to about what I assume is the middle of the clearing and stops, and I hear nothing. No breathing. I mean, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing. Nothing but trees and darkness. What the hell? Unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there listening for other noises. Nothing, just crickets and the breeze. I decide that there are a lot of strange noises in the woods and tried not to let it bother me. Besides, I had my rifle. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, then woman's laughter and sticks snapping far off to my left. I'm up now, wondering if what I'm hearing is really what I'm hearing or just a product of being half asleep. I hear more faint laughing from a couple of other different directions, all different, i.e. men, old women, even children, and confirm that it's real. The noises are closing in, and I grab my rifle, preparing to fire a warning shot off in the air in case they came too close. Something about this laughter, how far in I was, the noise earlier, and the time of night told me that this was not just another family strolling through. I was on edge already, but then I noticed the nightlife was dead quiet. Not even the wind was making any noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line, saw nothing, listened intensely to my surroundings. No laughing, and the forest sounds had returned. Relaxing just a bit and figuring that scared whoever off, I sat down, and in my exhausted state, I fell asleep. I wake up in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I immediately hear two people whispering not too far from my tent. Alert, grab my rifle and listen to what they're saying. I can't make out much, but I hear something about being lost, so I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent. I shout again, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly, a huge burst of flame, like a flamethrower, erupted from the middle of the clearing, illuminating several silhouettes of people just standing around. In shock, I fire my rifle, blowing a hole in the front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up and sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was. I hiked until sunrise back to my truck, with my head over my shoulder the entire way. Never heard anyone follow me, never saw anyone or anything the whole way, but couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. After that, my enjoyment of camping alone left me like I left all my gear in the woods that night.
This happened when I was 15, near Algonquin Park. My father and I were driving up to our cottage in the middle of winter. I was always so amazed at the beauty of Algonquin Park and Muskoka, and had grown up enjoying the beauty of it every summer. Our cottage was on a larger lake about 30 minutes from the nearest town. There were probably thousands of cottages on the lake. During the summer, the lake and the town's population tripled. It was cottage country, so people would spend all summer enjoying the lake and warm nights around campfires with family and friends. I spent every summer there growing up, and it still brings fond memories of sunshine and laughter and the sound of motorboats on the lake. But the winters were different. The people that didn't live there all year round would venture back home to city life, leaving the area mostly deserted, with cottages boarded up for the winter. There were a few people that still frequently would come up every few months for a few days or so, but for the most part, the lake was silent during the winters, and the town was just filled with locals. The beautiful pine trees are always covered with snow, making the forest quiet. Our cottage was on a dead-end road. There were about 20 other cottages on the road, with ours being somewhat in the middle. The cottages were quite spaced out, however, with our closest neighbors being too far away to see through the trees. My dad had needed to head up to the cottage to do some painting that Mum had been bugging him to do. It was at the end of February, and it was a long weekend, so I tagged along so he wouldn't be alone, and we could spend some quality time together. It was about a 5-hour drive from home, but that turned to an 8-hour drive due to the heavy snow. It had gotten dark out quite early, and it was around midnight as we drove through Algonquin Park. It was deadly quiet and pitch black, except for the headlights of the car. We finally passed through the park, with only about 30 minutes left to get to the cottage. It had stopped snowing, and we were both eager to get out of there. As we turned onto the familiar road, I remember my dad cursing. It hadn't been plowed yet. This wasn't surprising, however. It probably wouldn't be until later the next day that we would even see a snowplow. As we drove down the road, I noticed a fresh set of tire tracks. "The Smiths must be up this weekend," my dad said. And all of a sudden, as we drove around the bend following the tire tracks, the headlights of the car shone on a white van that was parked on the side of the road, that was almost hidden by the vast trees that were covered with snow. "What the?" my dad mumbled. As we drove past the white van, I remember looking back, through the back window,
and very clearly seeing two figures in the front seat, illuminated by our retreating taillights. I told my dad, and he shrugged. Maybe they're lost. I nodded but couldn't help thinking about how it was a dead-end road and why they would feel the need to park there. As we pulled into our driveway and we started bringing our stuff in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I couldn't stop thinking about the van and why it was there, with two people just sitting in the dark in the middle of the night. It spooked me so much that I begged my dad to let me sleep upstairs with him, instead of downstairs in the room my sister and I usually shared. It had big windows with no blinds that looked out into the darkness of the forest, and my 15-year-old self was already scared of the dark even without seeing the white van. It wasn't a big deal when my sister was there, but not tonight. As my dad got ready for bed, I sat in the living room reading a book. My dad had turned all the lights off and I was just using a small lamp next to the couch to try and get through one last chapter before bed. It was so quiet I could almost hear my ears ringing. I also started to get the feeling that I was being watched. The living room has large windows with no curtains that overlook the lake, and it was black except for a light or two from cottages across the lake. I shut off the lamp and got up. Now that the cottage was dark, the moon was shining brightly and illuminating the snow. It was beautiful, and I walked towards the window to get a better look. But that's when movement caught my eye, and I remember my heart dropping as I saw two figures down by the back porch below the window, barely hidden by the surrounding trees. I dropped to the floor and crawled towards the bedroom where my dad was sleeping, my heart in my throat. I wasn't sure if they'd seen me or not. I woke my dad up, and by the time he got to the window, the two figures were gone. Where I had seen the figures, two sets of footprints in the snow led around to the front of the cottage and back down the driveway. I begged my dad not to go outside. He double-checked the locks and turned on the porch lights, hoping to scare anyone off. My dad wasn't as freaked out as I was, but still set the alarm before he headed back to bed. I remember being very freaked out. I lay there all night next to my dad, terrified. I looked out the window and see someone staring back at me. I lay there all night next to my dad, terrified that I'd look out the window and see someone staring back at me. The next morning, my dad went outside and confirmed that there were two sets of footprints leading from the road to behind our cottage, and then back around to the front of the cottage and back up the road. There were tire marks that showed the vehicle had turned around and then gone back up the main road. My dad guessed they were probably looking to break in and steal stuff, as it was the middle of winter and not too many people were at the lake. But they knew where we were. They would have seen our tire tracks leading to our cottage that my dad parked in front of. They also may have seen the lamp that I'd used to turn on to read. My dad didn't have an answer to that, and after much back and forth, he called the non-emergency line and reported it. Apparently there had been some break-ins in the area, and some stuff had been stolen from cottages that were boarded up for the winter. But again, I still wonder to this day why they would be interested in stealing from a house that clearly has people inside, what their real intentions were.
It was late fall in 2010 in northern Canada. I lived on a reservation my whole life along the border between Ontario and Manitoba. Dense, untouched forest for miles and miles, super isolated community, fly-in only, aside from the ice road in the winter. I went deep into the wilderness with my father and my eldest brother to hunt for moose. We left in the early morning, just before sunrise, trying to cover as much distance as possible before nightfall. We traveled winding rivers and had to repeatedly portage over rapids all day. We decided to set up camp just over halfway to our destination. My father figured that we'd make the rest of the journey tomorrow. Well, when everyone was bedded down for the night, I decided to grab some firewood and relieve myself down by the bank of the river, just out of reach of the light from the campfire. Out of the tree line, about 15 yards away, I could hear rustling in the bushes. I watched the area where I could hear the noise and focused on the spot. I felt kind of funny, like dizzy or lightheaded, and I could smell this putrid stink, like old milk or rotten food. Then I saw the trees start to morph and move ever so slightly and began to take the shape of a head and slight facial features. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness, and along the tree line, I could hear this voice coming from there. I recognized it. The voice sounded like one of my relatives who had recently passed. The face took shape of my relative. "Hello," they said. "I've missed you. Come see me." I smiled and stepped forward a bit, but stopped to analyze the situation. My relative's face stopped smiling and became emotionless. The skin began to turn pale and peel away. Chunks of flesh from their cheeks began to fall away, and I felt shock and fear overwhelm my body. I couldn't make sense of it all, so I started to back away and make my way to camp. I didn't realize at the time that I had been walking towards the voice, and I was further away from the firelight. The voice became angry, shouting at me to come here, so I turned away, but as I looked back one more time, I saw the most disgusting thing I have ever seen. It was rotting flesh on gnawed bone, caved-in eyes, and a hollow chest cavity. This humanoid creature was tall and super thin. I ran as fast as I could, trying to yell for help, but the fear made my voice quiet and raspy. I ran along the riverbank, and I could hear the heavy breaths of the stomping feet from this thing right behind me. I made it onto the top of the riverbank, but it grabbed a hold of my leg as I jumped up. I gripped and tore the grass trying to lift myself and yelled as loud as I could. Then finally my voice came back, and I yelled that someone has my leg. My brother woke up and ran over to where I was. Then he pulled me up and took me over to the fire. I was terrified, trying to explain what I saw, and that it looked like my relative, but not. I was trying to convince them that I wasn't seeing things, but my brother nodded his head and said, "I saw it too, I know." That solidified it. He acknowledged that it was real. We stayed up all night after that, rifles loaded and close by. We packed up when the sun was coming up and went back home. We haven't shared that story with anyone out of fear of being labeled as crazy or liars. I've had nightmares and couldn't sleep for months afterwards. I would see things, dark figures looking into my window, or hear whispers when I was walking home at night. Eventually, I was seeing this figure daily. I went to a medicine man or shaman for help, but I've learned that the ceremonies only relieves it temporarily. Friends have given me everything from protection pouches to certain crystals. I found out that there's a strong possibility that I encountered a Wendigo. I learned that if you encounter one and survive, it attaches itself to you like a parasite. I also learned that it could only do this if it touches you, which it did. Ever since that night, I've been on edge when I enter any forest or wooded area, which sucks because I love being outdoors and hunting in nature. Now I always feel like I need to keep my back against something when I'm out in the wild. Anyways, make your own conclusions about this. I've paid the price for being an ignorant child to the stories of old. They are real. I can attest to that.
Boy Scout camp in the Sierras, camping 10 miles from the main camp. I was 10. You could only see about 10 feet away. The remainder of the camp was at least 50 yards away through the trees. I picked the spot with boundaries to avoid the bean farts I knew would fill the camp after our chilly dinner. That year, 2 to 3 people had been killed by mountain lions in California. A pink gumball of a boy, I laid back, tucked in my bag, watching the satellites tiptoe across the sky, looking through the dark canopy like a TV screen in a dark room, when I hear soft footsteps creeping towards the tree line. My friends are asleep. I sit up in the cold dark and peer towards the noise, only seeing a floating branch sticking out of a velvet curtain. The sound moves steadily, just behind the black curtain of dark, 15 feet away to my left-hand side. Up over my shoulder, behind my head, around to the right, even past my feet, the direction the other campers are in. but I cannot see anything. It must just be my imagination, right? Just pine cones falling. After a few minutes it stopped. I'm so scared I have to pee, so I go out a couple of feet away to the edge of the dark to pee. I get back to my bag, clutching my little pocket knife and big flashlight, when I hear the noise again, and again, and then the loudest, shrillest scream I've ever heard, just a few feet away. One of the adults down camp shouts out for it to shut up, as if it were just kids screwing around, knowing full well it's not at 3 a.m. In the morning we found lots of tracks around me, some fur and some blood. Luckily, a second mountain lion had started stalking me as well. The two got into a fight and frightened each other off.
I'm in the army, and I'm a firm believer in all things weird and unexplainable. I've had many encounters under my belt. A few months back, we were out on maneuvers, just a big 16-day field event that no one wanted to do, more so than usual. It was cold and wet, and the food was trashier than we expected. No corned beef hash. We kept jumping TOCs every few days, and it's a lot of work. We just jumped locations and parked the trucks. There's a big mud pit that used to be a clearing earlier in the day. The trucks started struggling, so for space and safety, they are on opposite sides of the pit from each other. Everyone bugs out and goes to bed. It's just me and the driver for A500. He's looking at me in the dark like, crap, they left us, in the absence of leadership. So we headed into the woods behind HQ 300 and start working on making a campsite. The driver leaves and I'm working under red lens to drop our gear. I'm alone and the wind is shooting through the trees, making all sorts of weird crackling. Then I hear it. It's a subtle crackling that tries to imitate the noise of the forest. Super creepy. I'm low-key freaked out. It slowly becomes a pattern, like someone walking at uneven intervals through the trees. The noise is different. You can track its progress as it moves with or against the pattern of the wind. It's circling me slowly. I look around and don't see anything because red lens doesn't travel very far. That's the whole point of using it. I flip my helmet over and spot a silver dollar-sized spider with legs clinging surreptitiously to the inside. Screw it, I want to sleep in the truck. It takes a little convincing, but I talk the driver into setting up camp in the bed of the HQ 300, at least for the night. We tarp over the rails and start settling in. He goes to sleep almost immediately. I'm struggling with my socks and thermals. I hear it again. It's so close that I expect to see someone. Someone should definitely be visible at this range, even under red lens. I even saw people earlier and they were louder and easier to spot. Nothing. I slid under the tarp and go to sleep. Middle of the night. I'm awake and I can hear it. Definitely not the wind. It's walking around the HQ 300, just steady footsteps, clomping quietly around the edge. It stops at the tailgate where we have our heads. I tip my head back and I'm waiting to see hands, eyes, a face, anything come up over the edge of the gate. Nothing. I go back to sleep. The next day we move our camp back up to the original place in the woods. I get to talking with the TC who slept in the cabin of our truck. I mention trouble sleeping and he lights me up. He says he didn't sleep well. But in the middle of the night, something hit the HQ 300 so hard the whole truck rocked on its axles. It's a 22,000-pound LMTV. A light one. A casual bump wouldn't even be noticed. It would take a significant impact to shake it. He says that afterward, he could hear the sound of footsteps walking around the truck and that they stopped at the passenger door to the cab. He had his feet primed for 15 or 20 minutes to donkey kick someone in the face if they tried to open the door. He's 6'2" and was scared witless. It doesn't take long to find out that our tent and campsite are screwed as well. There's an uncomfortable aura that lingers. I have this intense and ominous feeling of being watched, like I was not welcome and maybe even in danger. It's so strong I couldn't stay up there alone. a constant creeping chill that there was always someone or something behind me. My medic ends up approaching me and tells me out of the blue that there's something up there, that he was looking for me when I was gone, and that he suddenly realized he shouldn't be up there alone. He started walking away, but said he kept turning around because he could hear someone or something following behind him, and it really freaked him out. Another guy confessed that he too refused to go up to our campsite because it felt really creepy, like the Blair Witch or something. And another guy said that there was definitely something up there and didn't feel like he was alone. At all times of the day and night, you would feel it. Then I got a couple of guys to come up there, and we laughed and joked about. The feeling got substantially tamer. Eventually, we jumped TOCs again. Whatever it was that had been living there when we arrived had kindly stayed as we left. Never been so happy to jump sites like that. Didn't have any more trouble while I was out there.
A few years ago, my family moved into an old, battered trailer in a remote patch of nowhere that locals joked about and rarely visited. We had left the small town life behind, and the trailer we moved into was worse than anything I'd ever seen. I'd say unfit for human habitation, but there you go. It smelled of damp, mold, and old smoke. The floorboards creaked like they were about to give way, and it looked like whoever lived there last had fled in a panic, leaving behind broken furniture and broken glass. My mum and stepdad spent nearly the entire summer cleaning it, trying to make it habitable. I was 12 then, and truth be told, I hated it. Before then, we'd lived in a quaint farmhouse nearby, but even that place felt like a palace compared to here. Before that, a small city, so moving from a city to a farmhouse to this isolated hellhole was a nightmare. For weeks, everything was fine, but then small odd things started happening. One night at dinner, someone asked my mum to close the window near the kitchen table. Before she could even stand up, the window slammed shut with such force it rattled to the whole trailer. There was no wind, the air was still. It was like the house itself had made up its mind. Another time, when we had no internet and we were stuck with old DVDs for entertainment, we were browsing for something to watch. The trailer was quiet except for the creaks and groans and the old walls, when suddenly out of nowhere, a DVD case of some old cheesy kids movie flew from the shelf and landed smack in the middle of the living room floor, flipping open as if thrown by invisible hands. The strangest was when my mum told me about my little sister's backpack. It was sitting right in the center of the kitchen table. No way it could have been knocked over by accident. And then without warning, it just slid off the table onto the floor. Mum swore the windows were closed tight, and no one was near the table. These might sound like typical haunted house quirks, but what happened next made everything real. One day my grandfather came to visit us at the trailer for the first time. As soon as he steps out the car, he looks over at the dilapidated red house next door, which is falling apart, and said something chilling. He told my mum that that house had a terrible history. It was the place where her cousin had taken their own life years ago. The way he said it made my skin crawl. The place looked like dead skin with peeling red paint. At the time I didn't know why it mattered, but after we moved back to the city months later and settled into a normal apartment, my mum told me more about the trailer and the red house. She told me how even now, she sometimes wonders if the strange things we experienced weren't just random, but connected to the dark history lurking next door. I can't explain the slamming window, the flying DVD, or the backpack sliding off the table. Maybe there was a draft. Maybe my grandfather was confused, but I swear, I could still feel something watching me from those creepy woods.
Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you've enjoyed tonight's stories, and I'd like to extend a special thank you to Deadly Cure for joining me in this video. If you did like it, be sure to let me know, and if you'd like to hear more from Deadly Cure, the link is at the top of the description or can be found on screen shortly. I'd like to extend an extra thank you to my members and patrons whose financial support
really does make a huge difference in helping run the channel. So thank you guys. It goes a long way. I hope to see you on Sunday for our compilation, and we should be back to our regular programming of Tuesday and Thursday come next week. But that's it from me, guys. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.